So just taking 5 and 4, for example. They might be just coexisting, you know, as a polyrhythm, which doesn't happen in South Indian rhythm, but it does happen in a lot of other cultures. So 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what these are resolving to is 20, really, because you can think about it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, If you take one of them to be your primary pulse, then it's just like I said, it's like a Getty. The inner structure becomes 5. And the fours become a cross rhythm against that. So if this is my tala, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, taki, 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 taki. So it's giving you a total of 20, and this relationship is going to occur no matter what 5 you take, what 4 you take, whether 1 is your primary pulse or it's your secondary pulse, still going to have the same relationship. Or you may be talking about cycles altogether. So you might have cycle A coming 5 times, and cycle B coming 4 times. And if it works out, actually it doesn't even have to work out if the grids are different. If you have different grids, then you're going to have this interesting coexistence of grids. So if the top cycle is divided into 7 pulses, and the bottom cycle is divided into 8 pulses. These are just things for you to think about. I'm not going to try them out right now, but these are points of expansion of these same concepts. So basically all I've done is, instead of talking about the inner structure, I've turned it into the outer structure. And now I'm talking about entire cycles passing by. So really the relationship between Gati and Tala it's just that. It's a relationship between 2 things, an inner thing and an outer thing. And you can use it, you can have a superstructure on top of that if you want, if you're composing, and you're thinking about a larger form, you can have a superstructure on top of that. And these are just relationships that will keep expanding infinitely. So again, you can see the same mathematics working out. So here, what I just did was I wanted to bring back Yeti a little bit, so you can see how it fits. So in the first case, we have 6, 1, 6, 1, 6. And in the second case, we have 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And they both add up to 20. And so this is how you can see how the Yetis can work with the grids. And so if you combine all of these things, you really have a lot of possibilities to work with when you're composing or you're improvising. These are the sort of mental, perceptual tools that you have. I'm actually going to open it up for questions, since I talked a lot about theory. Yeah?
Is the word kanaku, is that same root as the term konakol?
No, it's not.
It isn't.
So konakol is actually, that's a good question. Konakol is what I was saying with my, the drum language that I was using. So everything that I play on this instrument can be said by a drum language. So if I say, so that's konakol. Kanaku is this mathematical principle that I was talking about. It's the fact that everything ultimately comes down to a standardized unit that you can measure. And it is all based on this kind of a grid system.
And one more question, just a general question about South Indian related to North Indian music. When you're calling out and marking tala, say in North Indian, Tintal is 4 or 16 beats, whatever way you want to organize it. What would that be? What is that called in South Indian music?
It's called Aditala. It's an 8-beat cycle. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And what would how would you say that in the?
So this is the thing. There's no way to say it. It's a structure.
Okay.
It's just like what I've been talking about here. Tala is nothing without the gati. The gati is nothing without what you're playing. So this is how our knowledge is structured. So you have a tala. You just have a number of pulses. That doesn't mean anything. What subdivision are you playing in? That's the gati. So if you're playing in Chatushra gati, that means you're playing in 4s. So the tala is an incomplete entity without the gati. Just as any meter is incomplete without the subdivision. So in North Indian music it is a little bit different because they have specific bowls and they have tekas that go with each tala. So they have a way of playing it, and it's usually in 4 unless there's a different subdivision, and that would be stylistic based on the school of thought. So that's how that works in South Indian rhythm. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So are you constantly counting when you're playing?
I'm not.
How? How is that possible?
So after you do this, that's a good question. A lot of people ask me this question, actually. The thing is that these are all tools for you, and once you understand this to a certain extent and you've practiced it to a certain extent, it becomes instinct. I'm not saying that I'm going to be able to come up with 20 combinations for 20 right now for you, but what I'm saying is that when you're improvising, you'll be able to feel these things, and when you have worked on these rhythms with that perception in mind, with these shapes and these tools, which are really there to help you understand how everything fits and what the multiple possibilities are, then you can really rely on the instinct after a certain point. I think I have one more slide in here. So this is the building block concept. So like I was saying, I'm not thinking 6 every time. You know, I have certain phrases that can be 6, 12, 24. I know basically maybe what its value will be in relation, and then I rely on instinct on top of that to really bring in the mathematics with the musicality. And I know I've been talking a lot of mathematics in this past 40 minutes, but it's really, I want you to understand that it's focused on expanding your musical possibilities. And I think that all this stuff is worthless unless you have a really nice way, a really grooving way to bring that out. This is all secondary to music. That's the important thing. So I'm not sitting here and just doing math all the time. In fact, I'm probably not doing any math. What I'm really doing is bringing these structures in as a secondary tool for helping my music. And sometimes I break the rules. You know, sometimes I adjust things. There's ambiguous morphing that happens. There's ambiguous things that I do, but they're based off of this. You gotta have rules to break them, kind of, you know? So this is how this works in relation to when I'm improvising. Of course, when you're composing, it's a different game altogether because you'll be able to sit down and think about it and make sure it works out. So that's generally it. Did that answer your question?
Partly, but
Partly?
but what about if you get lost in there somehow? I mean, I can understand that it becomes instinctual, but then maybe you lose your attention for a moment, and then you lose the time, and then how do you get back into the cycle again?
Well, in South Indian rhythm, and in the South Indian context in general, we have somebody keeping the tala. So there's somebody clapping the tala. And it's really been interesting for me to work with other genres because they obviously don't have somebody just sitting there and keeping this for you. And so you have to learn how to manage without this. So that's when hearing it becomes really important. So even though the tala, if you're working in a group setting in South India, there's going to be somebody putting the tala. But you also have to know what it sounds like. You have to hear the tala and visualize where you are in the tala.
So you do visualize it.
You do visualize it to a certain extent, but after a certain point, again, it becomes instinct, and I can't really explain how it does, but this is sort of the foundational knowledge that I grew up with. This is what my teacher taught me, and then I'm expanding on that, and then it becomes instinct over time.
Rajna,
Yeah.
isn't it also true that you have there are many, many codified phrases that you have to drill when you're studying with the master, and don't you have to go through a whole lexicon of phraseology that gives you the instinct to know where you are after you learn all that?
Yeah, there's phraseology as you play it. So like that phrase that I just played is an equivalent of 8. And I'm not thinking that it's 8, but I know that it's 8 because
Right.
I've used it several times in the context of 8. And so whenever I do need 8, I put this in. So there's several phrases like this. Again, this is that building block concept, is that we learn the phrases as building blocks, and then we really insert them in different places. But the idea is that you don't want to lose the musicality of it. You don't want to reduce it to a number all the time. Because what's really important is that you hear it as music first, and then rely on the mathematics later. Use the mathematics to support what each of these phrases and the order that you're placing them in. Because you may play a phrase that you did not learn, which would be good, because you would hope to expand what's happening instead of just playing the same thing for years and years and years. So when you play new phrases, that's when this knowledge really comes in handy. That you can start figuring out, okay, well, what was that I just played? Okay, well, let me dissect it. Okay, I guess it's kind of like 6. And then you can go on from there. So even though we have phrases, we're not limited to just those phrases. Because each of these strokes, we have this, if you can hear this drum has a lot of different tones, you know. So there's a lot of things you can play with and just put them in different combinations, and it's really up to your ability and your skill in putting them together. So, yeah.
So there's so many things like therefore, let's say a contemporary music setting where that counting system doesn't have to apply, where musicality would be the dominant fact in what you decide to do. At that point, is it just the technique on the drum that's going to be important? Obviously, if there's a composition, they may have it written out with some of those things in it. But if not, if it's I don't know, a pop tune, they say we just want to add that sound.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it's just going to be what technique is on the drum in that time and what your knowledge and skill is.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but you want to look at the formal qualities of that music, no matter what it is, and it's not just playing to a meter. And I'm really against this. If you just give me a piece and I'm just going to play to the meter, that's not music. That's just me being in a room and you being in a room, and we're not interacting. Really, we have to, and this is really my guru's philosophy, is that you really have to take in the music and play that music on your drum, but adapt it. Adapt it in a rhythmic way. And have it interplay with it, and just go in and out of it, like, you know, really play around with it as much as possible. Don't just take the meter and say, oh, well, that's an 8-beat cycle, I'm just going to play what I was playing yesterday. So, I don't know if that answered your question. In a contemporary context, I guess it depends on what contemporary context you're talking about. There's different contemporary contexts. In jazz, it works differently, and then there's different kinds of jazz. So, it's really, this is a new field. This is a new field for bringing these kinds of instruments, non-traditional instruments, into genres like jazz. So there's no one way to do it. It all really depends on a person's skill, like you said, and the way that they see it. And I think that this is one of the most important things. The way that they interpret the music and see it as shapes determines what possibilities they're going to think about that come from that. So if I see something as a yeti, that gives me certain possibilities. If I see it in this grid and I say, oh, well, it looks like I could play this cross rhythm and then, you know, divide that in a different way and really bring in a totally different grid in here, I could do that as well. But it really comes down to seeing these directions that you can take it in.